With a Rotten Tomatoes score of 48%, Eternals is by far the worst ever movie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Or is that just what the critics want us to think? Let's discuss my thoughts of the movie. Not the critics' thoughts, my thoughts. Here we go. Before I actually get into this review, I want to say, as always, that this is a spoiler review, so if you've not seen Eternals, go to the cinemas. Hopefully it's not on Disney Plus by the time this review comes out, like Shang-Chi was, even though I filmed it like weeks before it came out on Disney Plus. But yeah, go to the cinemas to watch it and then come back to this video, or if you just don't care about spoilers, keep on watching. So yeah, without further ado, let's just get started with the first section of this video, which is the good stuff. Here we go. Alright, now the first thing in this section is that this movie is extremely ambitious in its scale and scope, and in terms of wanting to stand out from all other MCU movies. It has a totally different feel. And also adding on to this, throughout the entire movie there is also such large stakes, and it allows an entirely new area of the MCU to explore, because we've never seen like a threat or these cosmic events taking place on such a grand scale. Obviously we had Guardians of the Galaxy, which did take place like in outer space, but we never actually saw like something that was about to destroy Earth. Okay, I guess you could say Ego was kind of like that, and maybe Ronan, obviously, but like, I don't know, something about this movie just felt so different, and there were less of like the corny MCU jokes as much as the humour. It was quite mature in its tone.
Oh no, our table, it's broken.
And in general, you just got this impression that this movie was going to be significant and will have significant ramifications going forward in the MCU. And you felt that throughout the entire movie, you were actually genuinely concerned. Also, you wouldn't even, like, if it didn't have the Marvel logo, A, I probably wouldn't have seen it, which probably sounds bad to say, but anyways. And B, it didn't feel like a Marvel movie whatsoever. Obviously, you have, like, the references to Thanos and stuff, which I'll get to later on. And, you know, you had a few jokes and a few one-liners and stuff. But for the most part, it feels like a Chloe Zhao movie. And that's what I really appreciate about this movie. Some people aren't going to like it because it is so different, but personally that's why it stood out for me. Adding on to this, the movie is very rich in its lore and mythology, however sometimes it is slow in its world building, but nevertheless this world building was very interesting, particularly in like the first few minutes. Like we saw like the backstory, and we also saw this like scroll, like the Star Wars intro and stuff. That was really cool and a new way to tell this story. And yeah, it was really interesting to see, as I said, this whole new corner of the world. I guess you could say maybe it was a bit shoehorned in, the fact that we've had all these Celestials and they haven't really been anywhere in the MCU prior to this. But I still found it to be really cool to see, you know, how, I don't know, Phastos created this machine, or the Uni-Mind, or these Deviants and Celestials. I found that interesting for the most part. And there also are some really cool reveals in this movie, which really helped to gain my interest. And they really threw me off guard. Specifically the ones that stands out to me the most is Ikaris being the one to kill Ajak, I don't really know how to pronounce any of these names, apologies. But yeah, and that reveal when he turns on the Eternals, and they'll like have this argument, and then they hold him down. I love that. That whole sequence was awesome. And also, like, the Celestials were the ones that created the Eternals, and that they're just kind of like his pawns in order to, you know, bring forth the emergence of the other Celestial on Earth. That was really cool. And there were also some pretty good death scenes, which were impactful too, specifically Gilgamesh's. I knew Ajak was dying, but I didn't know what Gilgamesh was, and so I wouldn't say I was sad, I was just like, oh, Gilgamesh, no! So yeah, those scenes were really good, and probably the best scenes of the whole movie, to be honest. And there were also some really interesting ideologies and issues, of which conflict was about throughout the entire movie, which really felt so different to everything before in the MCU, and just really allowed for some really interesting conversations and dialogue. A lot of people were complaining that this movie was very, you know, reliant on exposition rather than action. There's only a few action scenes with the Deviants and stuff, and a lot of people aren't going to like that. I know a lot of people didn't like Loki, for example, because they were just sitting around talking for like the first 3 episodes. But I really, as I said in my Superman Lois review, I like movies and shows where you can have just interesting dialogue, and as long as it's interesting enough for me to be able to actually like be a part of that conversation, if that makes sense, then I'm intrigued. But if it's just like bad written dialogue, then I'm not interested. Unfortunately, I personally felt it to be interesting dialogue in this movie. For example, when Druig, I can't pronounce his names again, apologies, when, you know, he stated that they should be using their powers to help end the conflict between humans on Earth, and then all other Eternals stating that like the whole point of the Eternals was to provide the humans with enough resources to develop as a society on their own. They don't need the Eternals' interference and stuff. And they had that whole conflict as to whether or not they should help interfere. That was really, really interesting. And another ideology discussed was whether it was worth like letting the Emergence destroy one world to create millions of other Celestials or not. You know, Ikaris betrays the team to fight for what he believed in, whereas everyone else was like, no, who gives a crap about the allegiance to the Celestials, we need to save this planet because we've developed a connection to it and stuff like that. That was really interesting. I mean, the action was cool and all in this movie, but I actually enjoyed the dialogue more. And there were also some really good themes and undertones that were explored, as I said, in like allegiance to the Celestials and free will, whether or not they should break free from their control to be able to have a life of their own. And like throughout the entire backstory and stuff, they were like, I can't wait to go back to my home planet, and then they find out that those home planets were fake. That was really, really cool. So yeah, I really enjoyed those scenes. And for me, Kingo and Phastos, I don't know how to pronounce names, I'm sorry. They were definitely the standouts for me. They were extremely charismatic and funny. I loved the Bollywood scene, that was cool. And Phastos and his husband, oh my god, they were so adorable, I love them. And the son, you know, I saw the laser beams, oh my god, that was so cute.
Dad, I saw him on TV with the cape shooting laser beams.
I don't wear a cape.
As well as Druig and Makkari's relationship. They had some really great chemistry too, and probably the best relationship. I know they try to make it seem like we should care about Black Knight's and Sersi's relationship, or Thena and Gilgamesh. I really didn't care for those too much. However, Druig and Makkari, I mean, we only got very limited screen time, but I did really enjoy them. And as I said, Druig was interesting in terms of his dialogue as well, and Ikaris too. They were some good characters. And there also is this solid family dynamic throughout the entire movie. Not as much as Shang-Chi, which was very like a father-son sort of relationship throughout the entire movie. But in this movie, you kind of got the sense that they had been together for 1,000 years. And even when, like, for example, they go to Kingo's, Bollywood set, and they're like, oh, my old friends from college, like, and they kind of knew each other and they instantly bonded back together. That was really, really good. And you also saw in scenes where they saw Ajak's death. And they were like, oh, we loved her and everything, and they all bonded over that. That was great. And also, like, the Unimind thing, and they all come together to defeat the Emergence of the Celestial. That was awesome. But yeah, it wasn't as big of an element in the movie as it was, like, Shang-Chi, as I said. And also, two more things in this category. One, this is true representation of the world that we live in. We've got Makkari, who is this beautiful deaf woman. I can't believe that actress is like 50 years old, and she looks like 20. But yeah, so we've got like a deaf woman. We've got representation in terms of the LGBTQIA+ community. We've got some beautiful Asian representation. We've got so many representation. I just feel so diverse. And this is also represented through like it being a globe-trotting sort of movie. So they go to Australia. And they go to, like, Egypt, I think it was Greece. Like, it feels so diverse, and it's just so refreshing to watch on screen. And they also, you know, explore a lot of the eras throughout time and stuff, and you see all these different iconic, like, moments in history. That was awesome. And also the visuals in this movie was beautiful. I pretty much said that every single review, so I don't really know if I have to delve into that anymore. But yeah, I did enjoy looking at this movie, specifically, like, in the opening few scenes, and, like, the sun. All those visuals were really cool to look at. But yeah, that's all in this section, unfortunately, so let's move on to the next section, which is the mixed stuff. Here we go. Alright, now, other than the standouts I've already mentioned, most of the characters in this movie were kind of dry and just not really interesting, in my opinion. As I said, Thena, Gilgamesh, Sersi, Black Knight, none of those really interested me. The actors didn't really bring anything particularly different to these roles. Even like the star power of Angelina Jolie couldn't really save Thena for me. And I also don't even really understand her character's story about somehow being evil and like hearing voices or something, and then she was called to the Deviants towards the end of the movie or something. I didn't really particularly get interested nor understood that story, so yeah. And I saw a lot of hate on TikTok for Sprite. Everyone was like, she's a 13-year-old like simping for Ikaris and stuff. It's a little weird, I'll admit, and her story was actually quite good, in the sense that she wanted to fit in because she, you know, couldn't grow up and stuff, and then eventually, when Sersi develops the powers, then she used it to, you know, help her grow and stuff and live a normal life. That was really sweet. I didn't really like the fact that she joined Ikaris towards the end, obviously, that was weird, but yeah. And Ikaris also had some interesting moments, but even Richard Madden's performance was basic and didn't really bring anything new. As I said, I love the scene where he turned on the Eternals and stuff, and you know, his relationship with Sersi was okay, but it was nothing like I was like, oh my goodness, it was so good. It's just and these performances weren't bad either. I just wasn't particularly interested. And also, while this movie was so different to anything before in the MCU, and I said in my good stuff, I really appreciated that it was so different and they're trying new things in Phase 4, it kind of also cheapens and undermines everything if we're already like, oh, well, what was the point when the Eternals are faced worse or couldn't interfere? Like, the Celestial could have destroyed this entire planet, and what was Ant-Man gonna do against the Celestial? Like, if we have such a massive world-ending threat in the Emergence, why should I care about this random tracksuit mafia and Hawkeye? And I know that the same thing happened in terms of, like, Thanos. Like, a lot of people were saying, like, if we've already faced someone who killed half the planet, why should I care about this random thing? But I think Eternals probably makes this problem even worse, because, you know, it was much grander scale. I find it to be probably even more of a world-ending threat than Thanos. Well, probably, no, definitely, because it's killing the whole population, not just half the population. Yeah, but honestly, that's kind of nitpicking. No matter what Marvel's going to do going forward, whether it be with Kang or Galactus or whatever, you're gonna be like, okay, why should I care about the Infinity Saga then? You know what I mean? And also, yeah, because we haven't seen the Eternals before in 3 whole phases with Thanos and everything, a lot of times I had to come up with excuses as to why they weren't there. Like, why didn't you guys help fight Thanos? And they're like, because we were told by the Celestials not to interfere. Like, sure, I don't really buy it, but I'll go with it. You know, because Kevin Feige just wanted to introduce the Eternals now, so good enough excuse, I guess. But anyways, the final thing in this category before I get onto the things I didn't like about the movie, the post-credit scenes really didn't increase my thoughts of the movie, nor decreased. I didn't even realise that it was Blade speaking to Black Knight in the treasure chest or whatever, and I didn't really care that Harry Styles was in the MCU. I mean, my sister, she loves Harry Styles, but shout out to my sister. But I don't really care, and I couldn't even really take him seriously in that role. He just seemed like Harry Styles in a superhero costume, to be honest. Although I am slightly intrigued as to him being Thanos' brother, they said, Eros or something his name is, but look, we'll see where that goes. All I know is that Variety should never be allowed to go to another premiere again after the fact that they leaked that post-credit scene, you know, just to be able to be excused from spoiling a big scene just because they're a big trade and so they are exempt from punishment. But honestly, I mean, for people that were really excited to see Harry Styles, they were curious about the post-credit scene and they got it spoiled. I'm really sad to hear that, but for me, I couldn't care less if I got that spoiled. Anyways, so there's a lot of things in this section. Let's move on to the final section of this video, which is the bad stuff. Here we go. Unfortunately, I said a lot of good things so far, but there were a lot of problems with this movie. And I'm not going to say, like, forced diversity or any of that, but, like, everyone that says that can go get my complaints are basically about the story itself. And so I understand that, like, it got a 48% on Rotten Tomatoes, and a lot of those people were, like, racist people and stuff, and a lot of those are white, straight men and stuff, so, like those are valid criticisms, but a lot of those actually did have some, you know, valid points as to why the movie wasn't good, which I'll agree with right now. So, first of all, this movie was incredibly long. It was almost 3 hours. No Way Home, and I guess Endgame kind of needs that, and it could be argued that this movie needs that because, you know, it's introducing 10 characters. Sure, but a lot of that time wasn't fully utilised for the movie's benefit, and a lot of it could have been cut down to move the story along faster. I know people complain, oh, not enough action, boring. Not what I'm saying here at all. All I'm saying is that a lot of it was kind of unnecessary, and the stuff that was just talking, a lot of it was good, but also a lot of it at times was kind of just dry, and it didn't really, you know, get invested into the story. You definitely felt the length at times. Like, halfway through the movie, I checked the clock and I was like, oh my goodness, we've got like another hour and a half to go. It feels like it's already been 2 hours. I wasn't really interested in the first half of the movie at all, and I understood where everyone was coming from. I was like, okay, I understand why people didn't like this movie. Thankfully, picked up towards the second half, but the first half, it was just like a generic kind of get the group back together sort of movie, despite the audience not having any connections to these characters whatsoever, and it was such a slow burn. However, as I said, the movie does take off once they're all together, and there are some very interesting dynamics and relationships that work between the group, and I did find that the third act was very, very entertaining, and the second half of the movie was great. But a shorter run time and, you know, just finding better ways to establish these characters faster and to make each one more unique and interesting would have significantly made this movie more interesting. And a problem that I also noticed with this movie was that it didn't really seem to me like it knew what story it wanted to tell until Sersi received the powers from Ajak. The movie just didn't really know who the main protagonist was, whether it was Ajak and then she randomly got killed off, whether it was Sersi, whether it was Ikaris at the start, whether it was just a story about all of them together or the Celestials. Like, it was a bit like all over the place in terms of its characters and its story until, as I said, until it picks up towards the second to third act. The way they introduce these characters and the actual structure of the story really felt off to me, which happens to lead to my next point, which is by far my major criticism with this movie, and that is the non-linear storytelling. It frustrated the hell out of me in this movie. I could never really become attached to just one character, because as soon as my interest was piqued, it randomly just jumped back to another 1,000 years to a random event in ancient Greece or whatever to introduce us to, I don't know, Gilgamesh, and then it jumps back 100 years or whatever for another character. It's just like, wow. And then it just repeats that cycle. And even when we see Ajak's death, while the twist later on in the movie was great, and we see, Ikaris push Ajak off the cliff and stuff. And I also really liked the Eternals' reaction to her death, but I just couldn't have cared less about the fact that she died because I barely knew anything about her. And I only really found out more about her in the flashbacks after we already knew that she was dead in the present. And this was definitely the biggest flaw in this movie. If I was in charge of this movie, how I would have done it was to put all the flashbacks at the start, and then as soon as we get to that scene where they all split up, only then do we jump to the present and see where they're all up to since the band broke up. That way we already know all these characters, their dynamics, and where they stand on these situations, and so it makes it even more rewarding when they all come back together and you see that these ideologies and these relationships that were set up earlier can finally be told in a different way because they're now in the present. Whereas if it happens in a non-linear way, that we can't fully get invested into the story because we don't really know who they are or why they're fighting, and then we find out why they're fighting, and then okay, now I know, so that would have made that scene even more impactful. Does that make sense what I'm saying? And it makes that emotional resonance just so much more impactful, and we're not learning about these characters as well as trying to establish the story. We would have already established these characters, and so now only they can further the story, whereas they're trying to kill two birds with one stone, which kind of makes the structure of the story all out of whack in my opinion. But yeah, those are the things I have in this review, so let's just get on to my conclusion for the movie. Here we go. I saw this movie a few weeks ago, and it's taken me a while to make this review because there was so much to digest, and even after the movie, and I was just thinking about it, I was genuinely I don't really know what I thought about this movie, so I thought it was going to be a very difficult review to make, and it was. I spent a long time trying to think about what to say in this review. However, the more I think about it, the more I actually kind of like this movie, but I also can like it and enjoy it while still acknowledging that there were so many flaws with this movie. So in conclusion, this movie is extremely rich in its lore and ambition, which I can see why people may not have been a fan of. At times it was very slow, and it was more reliant on exposition rather than action and stuff, but for the most part, as I said, I liked it. The first half was dry, and my biggest flaw with this movie by far was the non-linear storytelling, which really frustrated me. But once the group was fully united, and we get some really cool reveals and twists, like Ikaris killing Ajak, which is the 50th time I mentioned that in this review, I was really invested. The ideologies that were discussed, mainly free will, and using their powers for the better, and their allegiance to the Celestials and stuff. That was all very, very interesting, and it allowed for some good dialogue, which was obviously, as I said, more significant in this movie than action. A lot of the characters did lack depth, but others were pretty charismatic and layered, and there were some good relationships. Visually speaking, this movie was also beautiful too, and it also was very long, and you felt that at times. However, what would have made this movie amazing would have been to establish these characters from the get-go, so the audience is already instantly attached, rather than learning as we go along. But look, while I do have significant problems with this movie, it was still a very entertaining movie, or at least the second half was, so I will give it a 7.5 out of 10. I would put it in my top half of my Phase 4 projects. Actually, funnily enough, I wrote down 7 out of 10, but I'm okay, I think the movie's better than what I gave it credit for, so yeah, 7.5 out of 10. And yeah, I would put it in my top half of my Phase 4 projects, and I definitely would not be opposed to see where Chloe Zhao takes these characters in a future movie, in a sequel or whatever. But yeah, so I really enjoy this movie. Let me know what you thought about this movie in the comment section down below. Do you agree or disagree with anything I said in this review? Stay tuned on my YouTube channel. This next 2 weeks is going to be literal insanity. I'm rewatching Venom tonight, watch Venom 2 tomorrow, and then I'll be working on my review for that over the weekend. And then I'm rewatching pretty much Amazing Spider-Man 2, and Homecoming, and Into the Spider-Verse before No Way Home, and then I'm watching it at least 2 to 3 times next week. So I'll do my spoiler-free review as soon as it comes out, and then I'm going to do my spoiler, not a breakdown, not a review, a spoiler live stream after I watch it the second time, so probably next Sunday my time. So stay tuned for that. That is going going to be so much fun. I'm so hyped. I am so hyped. Anyways, stay tuned. That is all I have for you guys today. Please be sure to subscribe, turn on the push notifications, join my Discord server, all that sort of stuff. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys next time. My name is Jordan, and I am out. Bye!